So my first question is, what happens to you? I know that there are a lot of writers who, when they're called postmodern, say, that has nothing to do with what I do, I just write. Do you like being labeled that way? Do you object to it? Or do you think that there is some validity? And anyone is free to begin. Unless you want me to call on you, which I, in my other life as a college professor, I'm very prepared to do.
Well, I mean, I would have to say that in my case, I think I believe those writers. I don't think that we can have, or at least from, I guess I should just speak for myself, I'm a cook. This is what I do. And this is the way that I've chosen to do it. It's not that intentional. It's not, I think it's a natural, I think it's just a natural curiosity, a natural expression. And, you know, it's not like I'm sitting there banging my head up against the wall at night saying, I gotta come up with a postmodern way to present bacon. You know, it just, this is what comes out. And a lot of the collaboration between him and I is I think, as we illustrated, really out of function. You know, it's either with the specific intent to change the actual experience, to control the experience so that we can convey our message, or it's a very functional reaction to a food composition that we've created that we don't have the means to serve correctly. That's me.
I don't know if I really pay attention to the labeling or the categorization. I think what's more important is a collection of ideas coming from one source. You know, you can go to a lot of restaurants now and see a foam. You know, in 10 years you might see, you know, a lot of little pieces of this. But wherever that concentration lies, you know, that's where the attention for labeling is going to wind up existing. So I think it's more of a collection of ideas on part of a lot of people or a lot of cooks. I'm with Grant. I'm just a cook, and we just, you know, we try and find new ways to cook.
That seems natural to me.
Yeah, but do you bristle when, or do you not read the criticism? Maybe that's the way to be. But do you bristle when you read words like that?
Sometimes, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, depends how they're said.
Of course, that's always the case. Well, following up on what you were saying in your answer about the aesthetic being very important and the utilitarian, the functional, that's going back to that old question of form versus function. Would you say that in the work that you do in the kitchen and at the table in the presentation of the food, are you privileging one over the other, the aesthetic over the utilitarian? Is there one that is more the genesis for what you're doing, or are both equally weighted?
Whew, man. If I can take the word.
You were a professor, weren't you?
Right. Yeah. I mean, I would say that there's.
Really.
I feel like a bad student. I'm like, I can't even pay attention.
Yeah.
The question was, oh, okay. No, just, I mean, maybe you're not thinking about these things, and that's okay, and you can just say, you know, I'm just working with ingredients that I love, and I'm not thinking about these things. But those of us who come to restaurants and those of us who spend a lot of our time thinking about what we're eating and being on the critical, not in the negative sense, but just being the critic when we come, we do think about these things. We wonder, is this coming from the texture of a food? Or you had something, the fruit leather, and then was it prosciutto that was hanging from that wonderful dome-shaped thing? Did that come because of the texture of the food, or a taste, or a sensation? Or, so was it more aesthetic, or was it more?
Martin has to answer that.
Well, I think firstly there is no, you know, aesthetics are a function. There's no there's no conflict really.
You studied the Russian constructivists.
But just Eastern Europeans, you know. So I think that sometimes the aesthetic is a valid starting point. But for example, in this case, the aesthetic, well, the whole piece is designed to accentuate certain qualities of the food. Because the food already exists, and you can lay it on a plate, you can serve it on a plate, but it becomes single-dimensional. And I just don't see the conflict between the aesthetic and the function. Like, to me, they're one. You know, and I guess we have to satisfy the functional aspect, the physical functional aspect as well. And there's no, I just don't see the conflict. I don't see where one shadows the other. And they probably do, and it's unconscious and whatnot. But I just don't see any conflict, really.
We've never once have said, we need to change this because it doesn't look good. I don't think there's always times when we'll have it, like currently we're developing a piece where, we'll sit down 3 or 4 prototypes and say, this one, I like this one best because once you put the food on it, it looks as one. It looks as a sculpture. It looks as a piece of glass with a stainless steel chip and then the food. And it looks better like this. But it's never like we need to make food be suspended off the table by 14 inches, so we're going to do this. So, I agree with Martin. I think it's
all of the piece. It's all of the piece.
Mm-hmm. I think being a cook, after a certain amount of time, that you can actually make something look pretty on a plate and have someone look at it and say, oh, that would be good to eat. And some things inspire. Everything inspires us, and like the light bulb plate. We had the plate before the dish. We found that dish at the MoMA, and we're like, what can we serve on the light bulb plate? And then we came up with the light bulb made out of blown sugar. And I think being the cook, being the chef, after seeing how things are done and seeing how plating is done, you could actually control what you make. We're always analyzing what we make. Oh, can we make it prettier? Can we do it in a different way? And hopefully we can make it pretty or make it really ugly like Homaro likes it. But you could control it.
I think from my end, my interest here is really on the process of producing a foodstuff. And a good example is with the box, where we just wanted to make something taste great. We don't care what it looks like, what it winds up looking like. How are we going to make it taste great without the accountability to human error? So anybody could do it. You can teach a 2-year-old to do it. And if we can teach a 2-year-old to do it, then we can execute it in a fine dining restaurant. Taking it a step further, with utensils, we didn't get to the utensils, but, creating utensils that spit out complete dishes. How can we just hand somebody something and say, okay, here's your green eggs and ham, enjoy. That getting to that prototype that can produce that dish is really where I sort of have a keen interest in, rather than, what does the dish look like? That's almost an afterthought in some cases. In other cases, it's what we're going for. We want to make a bowl of nachos look like nachos, but taste like a dessert.
And how do you respond when there are some critics who say, this is gimmick, this is just attention grabbing? Do you have a response to that? Oh, maybe they're not.
Yeah, we were not. Is there any critics in here?
My first response is, have you eaten at the restaurant? Because what I've found out is that most that do criticize have never experienced.
Fair enough. You all come from very different backgrounds, and I wonder if you feel as though you bring a specific cultural bias, in the sense of a cultural sensibility to what you do. What made me think of this was the tempura holders that were shaped like Pilsner glasses. So of course I thought, oh, the essence of the Czech Republic, or
right.
Former Czechoslovakia. Is that part of where you're coming from as cooks? Or do you feel that you're part of something that is much more global? Katsuya, why don't you answer that first, since you've been all over?
I think ancestry definitely has a role in what, how you create or how you plate or however you cook. It definitely does. You know, being Japanese and Hawaiian, I think a lot of my dishes are very simple but clean and not so jumbled or confusing in the palate. And I think that's just coming up with growing up Japanese. So yeah, it's in me, and I think it comes out.
I think in my case, we cook very globally, just from the point of view that we don't exclude any techniques, we don't exclude any ingredients, and so therefore, you know, it is a very, I mean, we'll use Japanese ingredients, and then a couple of courses later, you might have a dish that's kind of composed of South American flavors or something like that. But then more directly, we do, since I was born and raised in Michigan, you know, I reference the Midwest all the time in my cooking. I mean, the dish in the tempura holder with the smoldering oak leaves is all about the smell of the Midwest and fall, you know. So yeah, I think it definitely comes out.
For me, I think it's just whatever makes sense. If somebody comes up with an idea in the restaurant where they want to focus on a pizza, then we'll make a pizza. But if we're just making a surf and turf, then we're just going to make sure that the elements of land and sea are there, and then whatever components fill the void of the palate, then we're just going to throw it on there. It could be the orange carbon. I mean, there really isn't a grassroots, you know, ethnicity to that, or the Indian spice rub that goes on to the skate wing. So from my cultural background, not so much, because I was raised on McDonald's and really garbagey food. So.
Me too.
Well, I think language is a big aspect of it, because it kind of dictates the way you think. You know, and being bilingual, I understand that if I think about a problem in Czech, I'll end up with a different solution than when I think about it in English. And so all I'm trying to say is you cannot really drop the baggage, the cultural baggage. You'll always have it. And things make sense, you know, depending on the angle you're looking at them from. So you cannot, of course there's always, you know, the cultural baggage that we carry, and it's not going to go away. So, yes.
What do you expect from the diners who come to your restaurants? Do you want them to actively participate in the meal? Are you looking for an ideal sort of diner? Or do you not think so much in those terms?
I think it's important for the diner to just look at the dish, close their eyes, and then make sure it tastes good. If they can do that first and it tastes good, everything else is gravy.
But they definitely have to have an open mind, I think. You know, you can't expect coming to our restaurants and have like a, you know, meat and potatoes, and you know, you have to be a little more open-minded, and then you'll definitely enjoy yourself, and you'll learn. You'll definitely learn.
Are your servers trained to help people along?
Yeah, very much so. I think we want the people to be engaged. We want them to interact. That's why actually a lot of, you know, the stuff that we've done doesn't require a knife and a fork. It either requires them to actually grab it with their hands or eat it directly off something rather unconventional. But we definitely, at least me personally, we would never come up with an idea based on our ideal or dream guest in the restaurant. What I found is that it runs the gamut. I mean, we've had parents bring in their children that are 8 years old and sit through a 26-course meal and try every course and love it. Like come downstairs and into the kitchen and talk about how cool it was, right? And then we have, you know, the 80-year-old woman that when her two kids are taking her out for a birthday dinner and ask her where she wants to go, she says Alinea. And she comes in and again comes down to the kitchen and says, best meal I've ever had in 80 years. Thank you so much. So it's interesting, even the risks that we take and the expressive nature of the food, that it's really bridging a lot of generations and people. I think that's the key, is that whether you're that 80-year-old woman that's coming in for her birthday dinner or that 12-year-old kid, you just need to come in with an open mind and want to experience something, because that's really what it is. It's not dinner anymore. It's something else.
Well, I want to give the audience time to ask questions, so I will restrain myself and ask just one more. If you had to name, and of course now you have to name because I'm asking you this, one implement or design that you think most perfectly expresses your culinary identity, what would it be? And I know it's hard. Everyone's always asking me, well, what's your favorite dish? And it all depends on my mood. So it can be what it is at this moment. But if there's something that you think is sort of quintessentially what you and your food are all about, what would you say it is and why?
Well, if you go to the Cantu Designs website, you'll see a weird-looking thing that looks like a Vulcan claw, and that's actually a utensil that is designed using synthetic muscle fibers. When you squeeze the handle, these claws can pinch, cut, pick up, and we don't know what to do with it really, but it's pretty cool.
Good answer.
The olive oil bonbon, which is that single teardrop of caramel that encases olive oil. And that was this amazing discovery we had, inspired by a famous pastry chef in Spain. And it's very clean, like the way I like things, and beautiful, and full of flavor, and pure to us, and natural. And that's probably, expresses everything we try to do at the minibar.
Thank you. So I'm sure that there are questions. I hope there are questions in the audience. We have a microphone that'll, Harley, you can start it off.
Has anyone studied the nutritional value of these foods you've fiddled with? Does it increase or stay the same? And also, it seems that a lot of your work is reducing foods and flavors. And I remember the joy of a big French dip sandwich in Chicago, big, huge, bigger than in New York. And I wonder if you're working on enlarging foods.
I think that's a good question for Homaro.
Yeah, I think that when you start talking about flavor, what tastes good, and what is good for you, almost always they're opposite ends of the spectrum. I was actually reading an interesting article. It's probably going to gag most of you, but it was on meat being created in a petri dish, and it was in Discover magazine this month. If you could grow meat in a petri dish, you didn't have to slaughter the poor cows, and you could eat meat guilt-free without having to worry about making your heart explode, then we would probably do that. It'd probably be a no-brainer. So I guess the connection from creating meat in a petri dish and then spinning it out of a printhead really isn't too far for me. As long as the ingredients or the basic building blocks of flavor and texture are natural and good for you. So if we are able to take animal protein and culture it and develop this structure to it, or take amylose and amylopectin and create a loaf of bread out of a printhead with it, then what's the difference between that and what you're getting right now? What you're getting right now could be something that's altered by the environment in a negative way. Does that answer the question?
But not about the French dip. I think he's still waiting to bring
For now, the French dip is better.
Okay. Other questions?
Yeah, I might have a question that's more about the practical than the theoretical. And this presentation is about rethinking presentation, but also rethinking presentation makes you have to rethink service. And I'm just curious about how the food gets transported to the table. I know at Minibar there's a sort of a sushi counter, which makes it easy. So when I picture our food on the skewers just swinging on the trays coming to the table. But I also was wondering about theft too, with these lovely designs. You have to worry about that.
Theft is a problem. but I guess you're more connected to the service.
Well, I think that's part of what we're talking about when we say functionality. I mean, all of the pieces that he does can be run through the dish machine and are designed with the thought in mind that they are going to have to go on a tray and be transported upstairs, in fact, at Alinea, in a stable manner. So that's all part of the process of the design. I would imagine that he thinks about that a lot because he knows these are the parameters that we're playing in. Yeah, people steal stuff all the time. I mean, you would be shocked. You'd be shocked.
Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, we got lucky because the people are sitting right in front of us, and it's only like 2 feet for it to travel. And even though they're sitting 2 feet away, we've had things stolen right in front of our eyes. It's amazing.
I have 2 questions. One is, when you're staffing your restaurant, do you, mostly for kitchen staff, do you tend to look for classically trained chefs, or are there other specific things that you're looking for when you hire your staff? And also, is your line, does it tend to be based on a classical form, or is it something completely different?
I like to hire all girls, actually. You know, a lot of my guys in the kitchen, a lot of them started as a dishwasher and they worked their way up. And luckily, we got to train them along the way and show them the way we like things done. And we have a lot of CIA students which also came right out of school or done their externship there. But going back to girls or women, they are a lot better. They learn a lot faster. To me, they learn a lot faster. There's no machoism. It's just they like to learn. They take things in and they just do it.
I think it has something to do with you.
Oh, maybe.
I think it has less to do with, in our particular case, I mean, there's a certain sensibility that a cook has or doesn't have. There's a certain instinct, just like any craft or any trade, I would imagine. And that's really one of the fundamental things. And the other thing is they have to be excited about what they're doing. They have to be passionate, you know. I mean, we work really long days and they don't make a lot of money, and sometimes there's not a lot of instant gratification. And so, you know, it takes a unique personality to excel in a kitchen that's so demanding, so focused on creativity, and so long of a day. I mean, you genuinely have to go home after 16 hours and can't wait to get back there the next day. That's the person we're looking for. Not the guy that has the blue chip resume, you know, that worked at French Laundry and Trotters and Per Se and Danielle, and that doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. I equate it to, it's a relationship. It's like getting married or being with your significant other. Like some restaurants, you just mesh and things work really well, and some they don't, you know? And that's really where, I think that's really where it's at. You get that person that is really excited to come to work, and you're done. It's good.
I think for us at Moto, I don't have any stringent guidelines like, you know, Grant saying I don't care about experience. It really doesn't do me any good. But they have to be willing to work every position in the restaurant, including working a week with our PR team. The reason for that is that, you know, I think it's important for an individual to go from one restaurant to the next knowing how to run a restaurant and understanding how to run a business, because this whole movement doesn't make any sense if we all go out of business. The restaurant has to generate a profit. It's important that they understand that just as much as they understand the importance of making sure that a dish is clean or, you know, we season food properly.
Well, I want to say that your presentations are fabulous, and what I love is the unique way that you present food. But I could see a problem with the people that come into the restaurant, because particularly, Martin, your presentation pieces might put people uncomfortable because they may not know how to utilize eating the food. Now, do the servers actually show people how to eat it? Because they're not conventional spoons, forks, soup bowls.
Right.
just grabbing it with your mouth might not be,
Right.
Just tasteful or
Right.
appropriate.
Well,
So, and again, all three of you, you're serving very unique foods. It's not like soup, you pick up a spoon and you eat it. So what's the instruction process and, how does that work?
well, the front of the house is obviously very. Most of the front of the house at Alinea has been either at Alinea for a long period of time or were with me at Trio. So they're used to trying to connect to people, and they have an eloquent way of explaining. Lean forward and bite this right off the end of this thing. I don't do it. You're never going to find me in the dining room telling people how to do it, but they're actually extremely good at it. And I think also there's a sliding scale. Like the first 2 courses that are presented on unconventional serviceware, stuff that Martin does, the service team is going to have to go a little bit more out of their way to try to engender some trust, let's say. But after that, and they enjoy that course, they enjoy the wax bowl and all that, and then they're excited to get the next one, because that's in fact why they're at the restaurant most of the time, 99% of the time. So yeah, the service team is critical. I mean, especially with the service pieces and explaining the concepts, and yeah.
So they're there for the presentation, not the food?
Who?
Well, I mean, they go part and parcel.
The guests?
Presentation and the food.
Well, it's a restaurant.
Yeah, I would hope so. Yeah.
So I hope they're coming for the food.
I hope so too.
But I think that more than that, they're coming for the experience.
Judging by the slides, it looks spectacular.
Yeah, I think.
And where can we do this in New York? Per se.
I think it's happening, no?
I actually have a question for all the chefs. Year after year, you see a lot of ingredient du jour, or preparation du jour, or presentation du jour, and obviously you're front runners in the industry, and you're inventive in your extreme cuisine, extreme dining, and extreme thinking. So where do you find your culinary inspiration, and who are the people who do you look at to influence how you're thinking and serving and inventing? I also have another question. When you're serving a 30-course tasting menu, how often do you change the menu, and what inspires you to be able to develop, that many courses for your restaurant? That's specifically for the cafe at Minibar. So those were really my 2 questions. And one more, actually.
Why don't you let them answer those?
Okay, yeah.
First. Go for it.
At the Minibar, it's like I said, we have a very small team that actually worked the Minibar and developed the menu items. So I'm sure it's the same for Homaro and Grant, that change is it doesn't happen, you don't, okay, tomorrow we're going to change 10 courses.
So it's seasonal, or it's what's
definitely
available,
seasonal,
but you kind of keep it somewhat consistent for a little bit.
I call it, instead of saying menu change, we call it an evolution of the menu, because some things, tomatoes are coming out, so yeah, you got to get the tomatoes in there. But it's, before it even gets to in front of the diner, it's a process before it gets to them, and it's a long process. So,
well, it's good to know. I mean, as a diner, I would want to know that I could come back and experience something that I really enjoyed again, or some incarnation or iteration of it.
Right.
So that was part of the question. And then how do you, where do you get your inspiration?
It's everywhere, no?
Yeah, when I first dined at Trio, that was very inspiring for me. One of the best meals that I ever had. And I was really excited to see that, somebody was doing something cool. Mm-hmm. And so, but earlier in life, I had always had a fascination with tinkering and building things and taking things apart. And so I guess after a while, they just sort of met up. And, now it's not really necessarily a culinary inspiration, it's an inspiration of processes and techniques. So, watching a documentary on how Skittles are made, that to me is very inspiring. Watching that process from, a raw cocoa bean being transformed into this little pellet-looking thing.
I can go on to the last question, or you can certainly.
Well, I think just quickly, I think is the case with all of us. I think you just process your surroundings, and as you know, as people that cook, at least in my case, I think if you're creating, or if you're an artist or a craftsman or whatever you choose to label cooking, if you listen to music, you think of food. If you see a painting, you think of food. If you see, whatever it is, you relate it to what you do and how you express yourself. So I think that's the large part of where our inspiration comes from, and the food itself. I mean, if a kiwi comes in the back door and you're looking at a kiwi and you're like, what can I do with a kiwi? And then it kind of unwinds or unravels from an ingredient. But, I mean, and also you can't, we can all sit up here and say like, oh, well, we try to do our own thing and we try not to look at what other people are doing. But, I was on his website 2 nights ago. You have to, if not only to not do what he's doing, because now as the media and the press lumps all of us together, and, it becomes even more critical that I'm not doing something with lychee and langoustine, and then I turn around and he's got it on his menu. And then somebody comes in, especially since we're both in Chicago, they come to Alinea and they have my langoustine and lychee dish, and then the next night, and inevitably, they're at his place.
Great minds think alike.
Yeah, I don't know,
Well,
So anyway.
The last thing I wanted to ask you, I'm a graphic designer, and I've been desperately trying to get more and more into the hospitality and restaurant industry. How do you find that the menu design and the interior design and the architecture play a role in all of your spaces and in the diner's experience? And do you work with those individuals as well to complete the gestalt of, not just the food, not just the presentation, but the whole environment?
There's my graphic designer right there. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think it certainly makes sense. I think you need to have a homogeneous kind of vision. I mean, we all know restaurants that exist where the food is far different than the interior surroundings, and that's okay, but I think preferably you would have something that's complete. I mean, that was our intent starting out, and that's why, I'm sure he could elaborate further on, like you said, the menu design, how the menu looks and how it feels, and that's all thought about. It's not just, this looks cool. It's like, let's think about this and this piece of information and how should it read and let's make it Alinea,
And Homaro also thinks about how it will taste.
Right.
Because you actually eat his menus.
Right.
So,
Right.
I think we have time just for one last question with the glasses, right? Thanks.
I just wanted to ask you, I know you sort of discussed being put into this group of chefs, and I'm curious, I don't know, is it design or what is it, and how in what ways do you feel that you differ from Ferran Adria, and for that matter, the whole Spanish movement? In Homaro's case with Mugaritz, it's very similar. In what ways do you think that you differ and become this new movement?
I'd say you have to eat at all the restaurants, and then see what we're doing outside of the restaurant.
I have, actually. No, and I'm just saying it more out of, in what ways do you think that it's in design? In each one of you has grown differently from this movement, and
I don't want to go labeling anyone, but I'd say first of all, Mugaritz is very natural. You're not gonna find sodium alginate in his kitchen. He's gonna find a way to pull off that technique with using natural ingredients. So that alone separates first. The second thing is, Ferran, of course, he started this whole wacky movement, and this is the misinterpretation of what he started, apparently. And I would say, going to minibar, this is like going to, a really out-of-your-mind sushi bar. Moto is a little more techno, and then, eating sculpture, I think, would be clearly indicative of Alinea. But, of course, when you, like Grant has said before, when you start thinking outside of the box, you enter a smaller box. And that's just inevitably going to happen. But I think that they're very, very different. More different than all the other restaurants out there.
That's a good way to put it.
And that's just because we're under the magnifying glass.
Okay, thank you.
And you've been under the spotlights too long. So thank you very much, all of you, for participating.
Thank you.